Welcome to the 70th episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Today we are here to discuss UFC Fight Night, Matush Gamrot versus Armin Tsarukyan. And once we get done with that, we're going to go over some fight news. We have 4 fights that have been announced or that have been canceled or moved or things like that. So we're going to discuss those. And once we get done with that, we're going to get out of here. I'm going to do a preview for UFC 276 later this week. That way we have 2 shorter episodes instead of 1 super long episode. So look out for the UFC 276 preview. I'll watch film for that and give you some technical analysis of what to expect in those fights. So make sure you're prepared for that on either Thursday or Friday at the latest. But for now, let's get right into UFC Fight Night, Armin Tsarukyan versus Matush Gamrot. Now, if you did not see, this was a very close and very competitive fight that Matush Gamrot won via unanimous decision. Now, in the fight itself, this was very clear that these were 2 of the top prospects at lightweight. I know they're both in the top 15, so they're not really prospects anymore, but both of these guys proved that they are the next generation of lightweights. The things we saw from these 2 in the grappling department were off the charts. We had a lot of really good wrestling scrambles, high level wrestling that we really don't see often in the sport. We saw everything from scrambles to we were seeing chain wrestling. We were seeing some great defense. I mean, the wrestling in the first couple rounds of this fight were off the charts. Near the later portions of this fight, Matush Gamrot started to pull ahead in those categories because I believe he was a little bit fresher. And when Armin Tsarukyan started to tire a little bit, he wasn't as effective in those wrestling scrambles. They were already super competitive, so when one guy gets the advantage in the cardio, he's then going to have that advantage on in the scrambles as well. And then on the feet, Armin Tsarukyan did a lot of really good work early. He landed a lot of solid body kicks. He threw a couple head kicks in there. He landed a spinning back kick to kind of the face-ish region. Landed right in the sternal area. It's kind of hard to tell exactly where it landed, but it looks like it at least clipped the chin of Matush Gamrot. But Matush Gamrot seemed to have the better hands. So Armin was, landing the better kicks in the exchanges, but Matush was being more consistent, landing some really good strikes with his hands, showed some really strong boxing, and did his damage in that way. And then I'm not really sure what else there is to discuss in that fight. I think it was pretty evenly matched. I think that's the number one thing that I took away from this is these 2 guys are very close skill-wise, and that these guys are going to be very tough to beat for a lot of guys in that top 15. I mean, just looking at the rankings, these guys are better than some of these guys that are ranked ahead of them. And I think this really establishes that we have a new era of lightweights upon us. When I'm looking at the rankings, you see guys like Fiziev, Gamrot, Armin Tsarukyan all right next to each other. Those guys are going to make a run at the top 5 in this division, and it's going to be very interesting next week, in 2 weeks we'll see the first look at that when Rafael Fiziev looks to take on Rafael Dos Anjos. Matush Gamrot is probably going to get booked against someone like Beneil Dariush, Michael Chandler, Islam Makhachev. Probably not yet against some of the super high level competition like Islam, like Poirier, like Gaethje. I don't think we get all of those guys in that top 5 quite yet. I'm going to be really interested in how they book the remainder of this division. But we're going to, like I said, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Before we talk about that, let's talk about the scoring. Once again, I disagreed with how the judges scored this contest. I think it was very clear that Armin Tsarukyan won 2 rounds. And then the final 3 rounds were very 50-50. But I did score round 4 for Armin Tsarukyan. I once again am disagreeing with the judges, and it's getting old at this point to come here every week and talk about judging and what we expect and what we need to see from judges. But I think we have to at this point because of some of the things we're seeing. I mean, when you look at how this fight was scored, the swing round in this one, I believe, is round 4. That is the round that, all 3 judges gave round 4 to Gamrot. And I've seen a lot of people on social media say they scored that round for Armin Tsarukyan, and so did I. So from what I've gauged, that is the swing round in this fight in terms of the judging. And when I watch that fight, I see one guy who lands a knockdown with a spinning back fist. I have a really hard time. Really hard time saying that guy lost that round. When you watch a fight and you're watching a round and someone lands a knockdown with a spinning back fist, I think they should win that round a high percentage of the time. Now, Gamrot did some really good things in that round. He had a good round. He made that round competitive despite being dropped. But I think at the end of the day, if damage is truly the number one thing that we're looking for in a fight, I think a knockdown is the biggest indicator of doing damage to your opponent that there is. And before, you could very easily call me a hypocrite here, because I have spoken in the past about valuing control time over damage, and to a certain extent. That was the argument that I made in Ketlin Vieira and against Holly Holm, and I made that same argument in Talia Santos versus Valentina Shevchenko. Now, with that being said, if you're looking at the swing rounds in those fights, Valentina Shevchenko never had a knockdown against Talia Santos in one of the first 3 rounds. Ketlin Vieira did not have a knockdown against Holly Holm. So I think you get to a point where that damage outweighs the control time in a way, right? If you get controlled for 3.5 minutes but land 4 good strikes on the feet, I don't think you should win that round. However, if you land a knockdown, I think that is enough damage to outweigh some of the grappling done in that round. And that's coming from someone who, I usually lean towards grappling. I look for grappling. Who's winning these grappling exchanges, and I like to reward them. And that was Matush Gamra in that 4th round, winning those grappling exchanges. However, the thing that I have said in the past is you cannot let someone control you for a large portion of the round, whether that be up against the fence or whether it be on the ground, and expect to win that round. At the same time, I don't think you can let someone knock you down and then expect to win that round. I think that is the flip side of that equation. You cannot get knocked down. If you are going to play this game where we value this control time, that's okay, but it needs to be consistent. In my eyes, when you look at these 3 fights as of late, and you assess the damage, and if you pick the close rounds in each fight, if you were to line up Holly Holm versus Ketlin Vieira, Shevchenko versus Talia Santos, and Armin Tsarukyan versus Matush Gamrot. And if you're and a reminder on this, you're just looking at the swing rounds, right? Valentina Shevchenko did a lot of really good damage in some of those rounds against Talia Santos, but she clearly won those rounds. I'm referring to the swing rounds in those. And when I say swing round, I mean round that can go either way. The round that causes, a swing round in my mind is the round that causes a fight to go to the wrong decision. So what I mean by that is, a swing round in Josh Emmett versus Calvin Kattar was round 4. That is the closest round, and that's the round that, it's not the closest round, actually. But that's the round that really caused the fight to go into Josh Emmett's favor. You can make the same case for round 2. You can have more than one swing round. But that's besides the point. If you look at those swing rounds in all 3 of those fights, if you say who did the most damage in the swing rounds, it would be Armin Tsarukyan. Armin Tsarukyan landing a spinning back fist and landing a knockdown is the epitome of damage and we see that fight get scored in the favor of the guy who has the control time. Well, in the other two fights, we saw it get scored in the favor of the person who did the most damage. Now, if you tell me damage is the most important thing 10 out of 10 times, okay. If you tell me control is the most important thing 10 out of 10 times, okay. But at a minimum, we have to be consistent, because when you give the guy who did the most damage and you don't score that round for him, but the other two, you just say, oh, well, they did more damage, they deserve to win that round. It's the inconsistency that bothers me. It's the inconsistency that makes it, it's the inconsistency that results in questionable decisions. If we scored fights the same 10 out of 10 times, I wouldn't have as much complaint in decisions going the wrong way. You know what I mean? If we were to score all three of those fights and score them all for the person with control or all for the person with more damage, that's fine. But I think it has to be done that way. You can't pick and choose when control matters more than damage and when damage matters more than control. With that being said, Matush Gamrot is still an incredible fighter, and when I talk about decisions going the wrong way, I'm not doing it to disparage or knock down the person that won the fight. Rather, I just disagree with the decision. Matush Gamrot is still an incredible fighter. This seemed like the fight that, you have two guys who have, I believe, 11 and 12 next to their name. But these guys are way more talented than 11 and 12 in those lightweight rankings. They beat a lot of guys at lightweight. Now, I think it went the wrong way, but, you can't really do much more, right? Now that I've talked about why I think it went the wrong way, I can't really sit here and do much more with that. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about what is next for both of these guys, and we are going to start with the winner in Matush Gamrot. And Matush is in a really interesting spot here because his win here, he had a great win. He deserves to move up in these rankings. But I ask myself, who does Matush Gamrot fight next? If you're looking ahead of him in the rankings, is he going to get a fight against Conor McGregor or Tony Ferguson? No, he's not going to get those fights. Those guys are 8 and 9 too. So when you're looking at a guy who just won in the 11th spot, usually 8 and 9 is a decent range to expect for your next fight. But that's out of the question for Matush Gamrot. If you're looking at 7 and 10, which are two other very possible outcomes, you have Rafael dos Anjos and Rafael Fiziev. The winner is going to move up and fight some more highly skilled competition. So the loser of that one, I think, would be a possibility. But at the same time, if Rafael Fiziev loses, you're putting yourself in a situation where we're now going to match Matush Gamrot up with another young up-and-comer, and that may not be the most beneficial thing to do, is have all these young guys fight each other when they're the future of these divisions. And then from there, I think the fight that really makes sense is number 6, Beneil Dariush. There's been a lot of talk about Beneil Dariush getting a title shot, and I'm really just not there. Looking at what Beneil Dariush has done, he has wins. Let's go over who he has beat to get to the number 6 spot in the rankings, because I really don't follow why he is so high in these rankings at this point. He has an incredible record, and he has some incredible wins. So Beneil Dariush has wins over Thiago Moyes, Drew Dober, very good wins that get you in the rankings. Frank Camacho, Drakkar Klose, Scott Holtzman, not tremendous. Diego Ferreira, and Tony Ferguson. That win over Tony Ferguson doesn't necessarily incredibly impress me. Tony Ferguson didn't look great in that fight. It didn't seem like there was much competition there. So realistically, I think Beneil Dariush versus Matush Gamrot makes a level of sense. And if Beneil Dariush can beat someone like Matush Gamrot, I think he would deserve himself a fight against a high level opponent. And when you're looking at that division right now, you're probably going to see Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev, and then you're going to see something like Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje, and you're going to see something like Michael Chandler versus Conor McGregor. That's a very real outcome, and that leaves number 6 Beneil Dariush sitting there with no opponent. So I think a fight against Matush Gamrot would make sense. You can take out that young up-and-comer before he jumps you. For example, look at Islam Makhachev, was that up-and-comer in that division, and he has completely jumped Beneil Dariush in line for a title shot. I know they were supposed to fight, and that fight was canceled. But look at who's ranked ahead of who, and look who's going to get the title shot. It's Islam Makhachev. Excuse me. So I think Beneil Dariush should be proactive in that, and he should take out someone like Matush Gamrot, and I think that would help him. The other possible option for Beneil, I guess we're not really talking about Beneil, but the winner of Rafael dos Anjos and Rafael Fiziev would make sense. I've said those two about 15 times in this little rant, but that would make a level of sense. At the same time, if Fiziev wins, I'd like to see him booked up against like a Michael Chandler. That all depends on how that fight goes. We'll talk more about that later on. But for Matush Gamrot, Beneil Dariush is a name that I like. And then for Armin Tsarukyan, I don't think Armin Tsarukyan should slip too far in these rankings. Like I said, I've talked about RDA and Fiziev a lot, but I think the loser of that fight would make sense for Armin. He's still fighting up in the rankings. I think he deserves that after the talent that he displayed. If Matush gets Beneil, I think the loser of RDA and Fiziev makes sense for Armin Tsarukyan. From there, I think if Brad Riddell gets a win against Jalen Turner, or you could just cut that out in general and go the winner of Jalen Turner versus Brad Riddell, that would make a level of sense. Maybe Armin Tsarukyan versus Diego Ferreira. Maybe Armin Tsarukyan versus Gregor Gillespie would be a good one. So those are just some names for Armin Tsarukyan that keep him in that 10 to 15 range in the rankings. I know Gregor Gillespie is unranked, but he's effectively a ranked fighter, and he's someone that a lot of people really like. So I think all of those fights would make sense for Armin Tsarukyan. Moving on to the co-main event, we saw Shavkat Rakmanov defeat Nurmagomedov with a guillotine choke. And my goodness, Shavkat Rakmanov is incredible. I really like Shavkat Rakmanov and what he's doing right now. His climb and the way he has looked against some of the guys that he has beat. He did not have an easy path to get to the rankings. You know, he didn't fight very many bombs on his way up this division. Most notably, he beat Alex Cowboy Oliveira in a one-sided fight. Michael Perceres, Carlston Harris is someone who I personally really like and think highly of. And then he has now beat Nurmagomedov in his first fight inside of those welterweight rankings, and I think that is an incredible name to add on your resume. When you look at this fight, I was really surprised with how well he was able to dominate from top position. I assumed that Shavkat Rakmanov was going to have the advantage here in both the grappling and in the striking exchanges, especially the striking exchanges at a distance. I thought the clinches where Nurmagomedov could get some good work done, but nonetheless, you have Shavkat Rakmanov go out there and really take down a guy like Nurmagomedov, wear on him, and eventually finish him with a guillotine. And I think I speak for most people when I say this fight wasn't particularly close in my eyes. It had a feel to it like it's just a matter of time before Shavkat Rakmanov gets this done. And sometimes the way a fighter makes you feel in that sense is more important than what your eyes are telling you. I felt as if Shavkat Rakmanov was really pulling ahead, and I felt that he was displaying some things that I really liked. And he just gives off this vibe of, yeah, I'm gonna come in there and I'm gonna submit you. I might knock you out. I'll do what I want to do. I'm just gonna clean you out, take care of you, and move up in those rankings. That's kind of the vibe you get from him. And he's going to be in the top 10 after this fight. If the UFC would like to do a similar fight to what we saw last night, Sean Brady versus Shavkat Rakmanov makes a lot of sense if you want to book two guys against each other who are next to each other in the rankings and are both going to be vying for top competition. In my eyes, what that really does is it makes it easier on the UFC to matchmake. For example, if Shavkat, Rakmanov, and Sean Brady fight, now you can book Shavkat, Rakmanov, say Shavkat wins, just for argument's sake. Now you only have to book Shavkat, Rakmanov in that top 8 against the elite guys at welterweight. You don't have to worry about booking Sean Brady. He can get someone at the latter portion of those rankings. Otherwise, you're looking for 2 veterans to fight, Sean Brady and Shavkat Rakmanov. So I think that's kind of the little tricky thing that they like to do, that they've been doing. They did it with Arnold Allen and Sadiq Yusuf. They've increasingly have done it. And I think they're going to do it with Bryce Mitchell and Movsar Evloev soon for that same reason. I don't really like it, to be honest. I like to not have those guys fight, and then all of a sudden you have 2 guys rising in the top 5. Boom, now you pair them up against each other when they're both in the top 5. Imagine if Tom Aspinall and Tai Tuivasa would have fought, 2 years ago. That would not be as beneficial of a situation as we have now, where Tom Aspinall and Tai Tuivasa can realistically fight within the next year and both be ranked in the top 5 at heavyweight. So I think it makes a level of sense to not pair these guys up against each other until they get to the upper echelon of those welterweight rankings. In terms of names for Shavkat Rakmanov, I really do not want to see him fight Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I think you do Wonderboy versus Masvidal, or I think you do Wonderboy versus Nate Diaz or something like that. To me, the names that stick out are Belal Muhammad and Vicente Luque. Both of those names make a level of sense to me. Vicente Luque, you can make that better case for because he is coming off the loss when those 2 fought. So, he is, in a worse position per se. But I think for Belal Muhammad, this makes a level of sense as well in a similar situation to Beneil Dariush, where I'm not sure that Belal Muhammad is going to find himself fighting Gilbert Burns, Khamzat Chimaev, Leon Edwards, or Colby Covington. I think those guys are all going to get booked against each other. I think we see a Khamzat Chimaev versus a Colby Covington or something like that. I think we see a Burns versus Covington and an Edwards versus Chimaev. I think those types of scenarios and those fights make more sense than Belal Muhammad versus Gilbert Burns or Belal Muhammad versus Khamzat Chimaev. He just feels on the outside. He feels a step behind at 5. Even though he's only 1 spot lower in the rankings than Gilbert Burns, those 2 guys don't feel like they are in the same position at welterweight right now. And I think adding another win against your resume against someone like Shavkat Rakmanov is beneficial to Belal Muhammad, like I said, for the same reason it was against Beneil Dariush, where if there's ever a situation where they're both vying for a title shot, if Belal Muhammad can beat Shavkat Rakmanov, it prevents Shavkat Rakmanov from jumping him in those rankings. I think a lot of times we see guys focused on fighting up in the rankings, and all of a sudden you've been asking to fight up, where I'm asking to fight up, and then all of a sudden you've been jumped by 3 up-and-comers, and now you're sitting in the 8th spot looking up and going, what just happened? I was just the number 5 ranked guy in the world. And I think that's a situation that can happen to Belal Muhammad if he does not get active and fight someone in that if he does not fight someone in the top 4, I think it would make a lot more sense to go up against a Sean Brady or a Shavkat Rakmanov and really secure your spot in those rankings and really stop someone from jumping you in the rankings. I think at times, like I said, guys are so focused on fighting up in the rankings, they lose sight in the strategic. You can play that a little bit more strategic. It doesn't always have to be fighting up or fighting down. It can be playing it strategic and kind of getting your foot ahead of someone else. And you can play those rankings a little bit differently than just fighting someone ranked ahead of you. Because you're not always going to get that. Look at what happened to Gregor Gillespie. He was yelling, hey, I want to fight up in the rankings. I want to fight up in the rankings. Now you're not ranked anymore. So I think there is a cautionary tale to be learned, and I think there's a different way that you can approach fighting ranked opponents, and I think Beneil Dariush and Belal Muhammad would both benefit from that. And it's really something that Neil Magny has done. If you look at Neil Magny, if Neil Magny would have won that fight, he's now still ranked 10, but he doesn't have to fight Shavkat Rakmanov again. He's going to have Shavkat Rakmanov's name on his resume. That's going to be in his back pocket. And then Neil Magny is going to be looking at a fight against someone like Wonderboy or Vicente Luque. So, if Bilal Muhammad were to beat Shavkat Rakmanov, I think that would legitimize him and give him and force the opportunity, or force the UFC to give him an opportunity against someone like Gilbert Burns. Now, for Neil Magny, he's not really in a great spot now, just because he may slide out of these rankings altogether. I'm not sure what they're going to do with Neil yet. In theory, he's going to slide down to 15 as Shavkat Rakmanov jumps to 10. Maybe he doesn't slide. Well, did he beat Chiesa? I think Chiesa beat him. Right? Let me double check this. Because I know they fought on like a Wednesday morning for some reason. I liked it, actually. I didn't mind waking up and watching fights on Wednesday morning. Yeah, he lost to Michael Chiesa, so he's probably going to slide past Michael Chiesa in those rankings. Did he beat Jeff Neal? God, Neil Magny has fought so many people. You just lose track of everyone he's fought. He did beat Jeff Neal, so he'll probably be in between Jeff Neal and Michael Chiesa. So that would put him at 10, 11, 12, I believe. So, I don't know who he's going to fight. Maybe a Pieda, maybe a Kevin Holland. Some guys who are not ranked or are on the lower half of those rankings. Ultimately, I imagine he gets a non-ranked opponent, and the UFC tries to push him out of the rankings after him holding up a spot in there for such a long period of time. Josh Parisian versus Alan Budo. This is going to be very quick. This was a very fun fight. These two hit each other a lot. They did a lot of wild stuff. Neither of them are really elite martial artists. Josh Parisian got to win, and Alan Budo is probably getting cut. Moving on, Thiago Moyes versus Christos Giagos. Moyes had a really good performance here. Got himself back in the win column. I like Moyes. I'm not sure that he is a top 15-esque opponent. I don't think he can beat guys like Armin or Matush, but he will beat a lot of fighters like Christos Giagos. So he is going to be someone who I think gatekeeps those 155-pound rankings for a while. Now, Umar Nurmagomedov versus Nate Manus. If you don't know, I'm not the biggest Nurmagomedov fan. I'm not a Khabib fanboy. I'm none of those things. But Umar Nurmagomedov looked really, really good here. He probably should have got a finish, but he had some really deep submission attempts against Nate Manus, and he really landed some really big ground and pound. If that fight is 4 rounds, he probably gets him out of there in the 4th. If it's 5 rounds, he probably gets him out of there in the 4th. And if it goes to the 5th, he's not making it through 5. So I liked what I saw from Umar Nurmagomedov. Showed once again some very good takedowns, good submission skills, and good groundwork as we expect. Once again showed against a high-level boxer that he can hang on the feet. Landed a really good front kick / push kick to the face. I love seeing that. Nothing gets me as excited as a head kick KO. Obviously wasn't a KO, but I still love a good head kick. Umar Nurmagomedov, he should be fighting ranked competition at 135. Adrian Yanez is currently ranked 15th. I don't think they make that fight. I wouldn't be surprised if they try and do Frankie Edgar versus Umar Nurmagomedov, or number 14 Jack Shore, or maybe even number 11 Rookie Simone. I think you have to give Umar Nurmagomedov a ranked opponent after his last 2 fights. I think he's good enough, so there's no reason to hold out and throw him more guys who are unranked. And that's not to say guys like Nate Manus are not good, because Nate Manus is a very good fighter, and I think, he could eventually make a run at those rankings one day. However, Umar Nurmagomedov is, very, very highly skilled. So I've once again, I don't like burning fights like Jack Shore versus Nurmagomedov. Umar, I keep messing up the name. I know how to say Umar Nurmagomedov, but for some reason, every time I say it, they blend together, and I say Umar. I screw it. Jack Shore versus Umar Nurmagomedov. That's the type of fight where those guys could each be in the top 10, each be in the top 5. Let's not burn that fight now while one is unranked and the other is ranked 14th. So I like Frankie Edgar and Ricky Simone fights for Umar. And then you can give, okay, here's how we're going to matchmake this. We have Sean O'Malley versus Pedro Munoz. The loser of Pedro Munoz versus Sean O'Malley fights Adrian Yanez. Then you have Ricky Simone and Frankie Edgar. You do Frankie Edgar versus Umar Nurmagomedov, and you do Jack Shore versus Ricky Simone. That's how you matchmake that. We're going to leave it at that and continue because I just hit a home run there. Thank you very much. Chris Curtis versus Rodolfo Vieira. I love me some Chris Curtis, and he really showed that he was working that takedown defense in this one. Rodolfo Vieira went 0 for 20 on takedowns. You can't use your jiu-jitsu if you can't get a takedown. On the feet, Chris Curtis was the much better fighter, and he had much better cardio that wore on Rodolfo Vieira, and Chris Curtis was able to go out there and get a win. It is not talked about enough that Chris Curtis is a 170-pounder. He is a welterweight. The UFC called him and said, hey, we'll let you fight in the UFC. It's going to be on short notice, and you have to move up to 185 pounds to take on Phil Hawes. Chris Curtis said, well, I'm a welterweight, but I'll go up to middleweight and fight Phil Hawes. And what's he do? Knocks out Phil Hawes. And then they're like, you just knocked out Phil Hawes. You obviously earned yourself another opponent in the UFC. We'll keep you around. Brendan Allen is ranked 15th, and I believe Chris Curtis stepped in again on short notice and said, well, I'm 1-0 at 185. We might as well keep the train going at 185, and he gets himself a knockout. Now, he's sitting at 2-0, and they say, well, you might as well stay at 185. You wanted Rodolfo Vieira, and Chris Curtis says, sign me up. And then he goes out there and gets an impressive 15-minute decision victory. I don't know if we're going to see Chris Curtis move back down to 170. He has looked very good at 185. I think it would make sense for him to go down to 170 if he can make it and make it comfortably. But once again, if you're fighting that well at 185, I'm not sure there is a reason to go down. At 185, I think there is kind of a logjam here. You have Kelvin Gastelum at 10, Nasruddin Imavov at 11. Nasruddin Imavov, I believe, is fighting Andre Muniz, who is 13th. Let me double check on that. Andre Muniz is currently... Muniz is fighting Uriah Hall. That's on Saturday. So my memory is just absolutely gone, apparently. Who's okay, we're going to figure this out in real time. Nasruddin Imavov. Who's he fighting? Because I've got this all twisted. Nasruddin Imavov is supposed to fight Kelvin Gastelum, and that fight fell through. So just rebook that, probably. Brad Tavares is scheduled to fight Chris Duplessis on Saturday. So if Brad Tavares loses on Saturday, I think Tavares versus Chris Curtis makes sense. I think if you beat the three guys that he beat at 185, you deserve to get a shot in those rankings. That's really... I mean, I don't really know what else to say there. I think he deserves a spot in the rankings, but I will give you some alternative opponents if you disagree. Because I know everyone probably won't think that Chris Curtis deserves UFC opponents. Let me pull up, or ranked opponents. Let me pull up the UFC 185-pound rankings. Not rankings, roster. So we can find some unranked guys for him. Christos Jutko, that makes sense if you're looking for unranked opponents. Bruno Silva makes sense if you're looking for unranked opponents. Gerald Meerschaert makes sense if you're looking for unranked opponents. But at the end of the day, he's beat a lot of guys. Anthony Hernandez makes sense if you're looking for unranked opponents. We have Armin Petrosian fighting Kai... what's his last name? Caio Kai Borsello or something like that. So I think that would make sense. But, he has done enough good work. Brendan Allen is someone who is nearly ranked, and he and Chris Curtis beat him. So he's got 3 wins over nearly ranked opponents. You can give him a 4th nearly ranked opponent, but at the end of the day, I think he deserves a fight against ranked competition. Moving on, I don't have too much to say about a lot of these fights. Carlos Olberg got himself a really nice knockout win against Tafon Kindichi. So Carlos Olberg, teammate of Israel Adesanya, is back on the train. Shailon Nordembeke and TJ Brown went to absolute war. I loved watching that fight. That was another fight with some really good scrambles. Nordembeke, very good fighter, and really deserved a win in that one. Sergey Morozov versus Julian Paiva. I like Paiva. I think he's very underrated, but Julian Paiva went out there and put it on Sergey Morozov for the first round, but Sergey really turned it around in those last 2 and won those last 2 rounds and got himself a win, so a lot of respect there. I think that's the type of fight that shows how deep 135 pounds is. Cody Durden versus JP Buys. These 2 were very possibly fighting for their job. And Cody Durden got the win over JP Buys. I'll be interested to see if JP Buys keeps his UFC roster spot, so keep an eye out for that. Mario Bautista got a really nice submission over Brian Kelleher. Mario Bautista isn't exactly a submission specialist, and Brian Kelleher is someone who I think, really gets underrated just because he's lost so many fights against guys who are so skilled. For example, Umar Nurmagomedov is a prime example of he lost that fight, but Umar is very good. Ricky Simone, he lost to. Cody Stemmen, he lost to. Montel Jackson, John Lineker, Chito Vera, Jimmy Rivera. He lost a lot of fights against some really tough and really game opponents. So that was a very good win for Mario Bautista. And then the last fight we had, Jinh Yu Frey versus Vanessa Demopoulos. I won't go in depth here, but I did have Jinh Yu Frey winning that fight, and I think a 30-27 scorecard for Vanessa Demopoulos is bad enough to warrant you not fighting again. So there's that. Now that we have gotten through UFC Fight Night, Armin Tsarukyan versus Matush Gamrot, let's move on to some news. Once again, we're going to go very quick here. We are going to start with UFC 267. I can't remember the numbers anymore. I've been talking about UFC pay-per-views for so long, I forget which is numbered which, but UFC 276, almost at 267. UFC 276 has had 2 changes. The first is that Lauren Murphy versus Miesha Tate is canceled. I do not know what fight is going to replace that on the main card. Actually, we have 3 pieces of news. 2 of them are fight changes. I do not know what fight is going to replace that on the main card. The other piece of news is that UFC 276, good Lord, the prelims will be airing on ABC. So I don't know what fight we're going to move on the main card because we're putting Jim Miller versus Donald Cerrone, Ian Gary versus Gabe Green, Robbie Lawler versus Brian Barberena, and Brad Riddell versus Jalen Turner. Those are the prelim fights. You probably want those to be the 4 fights that are on ABC. You probably don't want to move any of those to the main card, so you have a good card for ABC so you can kind of promote the sport a little bit. and you're looking for one to fill, they might go off the early prelims. I guess you could go. I'd probably stay away from Jessica I and Macy Barber and Jessica Rose Clark and Julia Stolarenko. That would just be my call. I think Uriah Hall versus Andre Muniz makes a little bit of sense, but ultimately, I think you go with Dricus Duplessis against Brad Tavares. Dricus is a very good prospect at 185 pounds, and Brad Tavares is ranked number 12 at middleweight. So we're seeing a prospect here go up and really have his shot at becoming ranked. I think those types of fights are main card worthy. You know, if you're looking for an exciting fight that has a lot at stake, seeing if a prospect is going to pan out in the UFC, I think is main card worthy. If you're looking to replace that with something off the early prelims, I think that makes sense. And then the other piece of news off UFC 276 was that you probably already caught this, but Jim Miller will be fighting Donald Cerrone instead of Bobby Green. I am concerned for Donald Cerrone. I mean, he hadn't cut to 155 since 2019, and then he cuts to 155 for the first time. Then the fight gets canceled. They move it back like 2 months or something like that, or a month and a half. He cuts to 155 again, looks bad on the scales, and now he's going to cut to 155 again 2 weeks after his most recent cut. It's less of his age even at this point, but the cuts to 155 this frequent, I think 3 cuts to 155 pounds in a year would be very testing for Donald Cerrone, but he's doing it in a span of 3 to 4 months since at least the start of the year. That would be 6 months. Still, it's less than that. I think it's about 4 months at most. I'm losing track of time here, but he cannot be cutting to 155 pounds this frequently. Really concerns me. I hope he looks good on the scale. I hope everything goes off without a hitch, and I hope both guys make it out without being injured, if you know what I mean. Now, that leaves us 2 pieces of fight news, and then we are booking it. Machine Tabora will fight Alexander Romanov on August 20th. That will be Romanov looking to get into those rankings. He might already be ranked at 15. Let me double check. Alexander Romanov is ranked 13th, and Machine Tabora is ranked 10th. That would be his first ranked victory, and that would break him into the top 10. Irine Aldana versus Macy Chazon is taking place. Irine Aldana is ranked 4th at the female 135-pound division, while Macy Chazon is ranked 11th. I wasn't exactly expecting this fight, but we will see how it goes and that could really change the landscape at 135 pounds. Those are just some quick announcements. Last thing before we get out of here, like I said, make sure you come back for UFC 267 preview. I really enjoy doing those, and I feel like I do a good job of breaking down what's at stake in each fight, and I feel like I do a good job of breaking down what can happen, what each guy's keys to victory are, what this fight is going to look like. I feel like I do a pretty good job of breaking those things down. I feel like once I watch film, which is another reason there on Thursdays and Fridays, gives me some more time to watch film. I feel like I do a good job of breaking down fights and knowing what to expect after I do my research. So I hope you tune in for that, and I hope I can give you some good technical insight for that fight. But either way, whether you come back or don't, I would like to thank you for watching this episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Goodbye.